So a lot's been said about the infiltration of our law enforcement and our military by white supremacists. But an Army reservist has been charged with storming the US Capitol. He was a well-known white supremacist and Nazi sympathizer. And he was well known on his Navy base where he worked as a contractor. And he was even rebuked at one point for, quote unquote, sporting a distinctive Hitler mustache. You can see the images of Timothy hale-cusanelli. He is definitely trying to brand himself in a very particular fashion. I want to read a quote from CNN, Marshall Cohen on CNN. It said the following: federal prosecutors revealed Friday that the Navy conducted its own internal investigation into Timothy hale-cusanelli that uncovered numerous incidents where he promoted racist and sexist views. The Navy Criminal Investigation Service interviewed 44 of his colleagues, and 34 of the 44 of them said he held extremist or radical views pertaining to the Jewish people, minorities, and women. His defensive attorney declined to comment Sunday about the new details of the Navy's probe, but has noted in court filings that hale-cusanelli maintained that he isn't a white supremacist. One of hale-cusanelli's supervisors told investigators that he would walk up to new colleagues and ask, "You're not Jewish, are you?" A petty officer claimed that he heard him say Jews, women, and blacks were on the bottom of the totem pole. Another contractor at the base said hale-cusanelli told them that Jewish people are, quote, ruining everything and did not belong here, according to the filing. And that is, again, according to Marshall Cohen of CNN. The absurdity of this is that despite all of these statements, Cenk, he is saying that, and his attorney is saying that he's not a white supremacist and he's not affiliated with any extremist organizations. Nevertheless, he was arrested for marching up the steps of the Capitol on January 6th, a part of the extremist action that was treasonous, the insurrection. The other absurdity here is that despite all of these reports prior to January 6th, it took the January 6th incident for this to come to light and for him to be actually investigated in this manner, for there to be any ramifications. So Cenk, it just really testifies to the fact that we have been successfully infiltrated, like many reports have come across over the last few years, saying not only that white supremacy is one of the leading domestic terrorist threats, but also that white supremacy and Nazi sympathizers have infiltrated at every single level of our law enforcement and our military. And we saw that playing out, particularly on January 6th.
Yeah, so Ben, I have to confess that probably a lot of Americans share this, that I was anywhere from a little to a gigantic amount naive about people's views on race and ethnicity and bigotry and sexism, etc. And I was even naive about my own backyard, because this is in my backyard. I've driven by that military base dozens of times. So I grew up in a nearby place in New Jersey, and I've often talked on the show about, look, I happen to grow up not in Cold Cenk where this is, but in East Brunswick, New Jersey, which is a little bit further out, but not that far. My parents moved real close to that base later. And in my town, it was, a really interesting mix of working class white folks, immigrants, Jews, Asians, a little bit of blacks and Latinos, etc. And so we seemed to all get along fine, and I thought that applied to everyone else. But it turns out if you're not in one of those affected categories, you live in a different world, okay? And so, look, I'm acknowledging it here. And if you thought that racism was no big deal, but now you're beginning to see, wow, a lot of people thought it and I didn't realize it. It's okay to acknowledge it. It's okay, it doesn't make you a bad person, right? It makes you a good person to go, oh, I'm open to new facts. And now I see things I didn't see before. If you told me when I was growing up that base was filled with racists and bigots and anti-Semites, I probably wouldn't have believed it, right? And back then, it was probably filled with more of them. Let's keep it real, right? I mean, Trump's given them permission to come out now, but and so things seem to have taken a turn for the worse. But it's been around the entire time, no question about it, right? And so, and in this case, look, that's the other part of this, Ben. a lot of people think that nothing is racist. Like other than a lynching, they can't agree to anything being white supremacy. And honestly, a lot of times in the past, they didn't even agree to that. The reason the filibuster exists is because Southern senators needed to block anti-lynching legislation. So they would speak for hours and hours about how lynching was not that big a deal and not that racist. So like, I mean, right? And this guy, that Hitler mustache is unmistakable. Okay, you don't accidentally do a Hitler mustache, and it's not Halloween, it's not any of that stuff, and you don't say that, do a Hitler mustache, and then say 1,000 horrible things about Jews at the same time, and tell me you're not anti-Semitic. No, that it's open and shut. But it goes further than that. I mean, he says I'm not a white supremacist, which is what every single racist says. By the way, non-racists also say it. Just because somebody says it doesn't mean that they actually are a white supremacist, right? But he says, I'm not a white supremacist. And then he says, as Ben read to you, Jews, women, and blacks are on the bottom of the totem pole. No, but that's the very, very, very literal definition of white supremacy. I believe whites are superior to people that are at the bottom of the totem pole, blacks, Jews, and women. So if that's not white supremacy, I think, or if you think that's not white supremacy, you just misunderstand the definition. It means people who think that white folks, white Christian folks, are generally superior to others because the others are black or I'm sorry, are all these imagined stereotypes, lazy, violent, and you go down, secretly control the world, you go down the list, right? Anyone who tells you that the Jews secretly control the world or control everything, I got news for you. They're an anti-Semite. That's what they are. Okay, there's no gray zone there. Like, you want to talk about policy of Israel or America or something, there's a billion gray zones in that area, okay? Jews control the world, no gray zone. Total, utter anti-Semite, and said while wearing a Hitler mustache. Are we having this conversation? Is this open for debate? Now, of course, his lawyer wants it to be open for debate, but the rest of us understand what's happening. But to me, Ben, I thought the most disturbing part of all of this, I mean, look, it doesn't get any more disturbing than this quote, Hitler should have finished the job, okay? But that guy says, no, I'm not a white supremacist. I'm not bigoted against Jews. I'm not anti-Semitic. Okay. So, and by the way, Hitler killed a lot of people, Poles, Gypsies, or Roma, LGBTQ folks, etc. But generally, when you're doing the Hitler mustache, you mean Jews. Okay, let's just keep it real. We're not talking about Poles here, okay? And it might be in a different context, but not this context. Anyway, Ben, the thing that I found most disturbing was Sergeant John Getz, who he reported to. Now, Getz did something really interesting. He told investigators, oh yeah, all that stuff is true. He said it to me too. Almost all of his 34 out of 44 coworkers said, oh yes, he has said virulently racist, anti-Semitic, sexist things, right? Including Getz. But then Getz writes a letter to the judge basically saying, he's a good guy. and then people notice the disparity and they ask Sergeant Getz about it. They're like, why did you say he said those terrible things? And then you write like he's not so bad and then you should show leniency. He said he wasn't personally offended by hale-cusanelli's conduct and wanted to speak positively about him to the judge. In other words, and he has said earlier, and he's not joking. In other words, yeah, I heard him say all those racist, anti-Semitic things, and I was here for it. And so I wanted to support him publicly by telling the judge he should take it easy on him. Sergeant Getz is at that base right now. He's not at all in trouble, right? So I'm not doing this to get him in trouble. I'm just saying that I think the problem is way, way bigger than we realize, because 34 of his colleagues all knew how deeply bigoted he was. None of them did anything. The guy he reports to says, I know what it is, and I'll write a positive note about him. Because, Ben, apparently they all think it's perfectly normal.
Right. Yeah, no, and that's the part, the part that stands out to me is the blatant attempt to absolve himself of his white supremacy, his Nazism, right? And the fact that that is a standard technique of the Republican Party, of conservatives and white supremacists. And the question has to be asked is, at what point would it ever be racist to them? And that's exactly why we can't allow racists to define racism, right? It's like you can't allow a misogynist to define misogyny. You can't allow an anti-Semite to define anti-Semitism, because there's literally nothing that they would ever allow to rise to that occasion, because then that would require them to actually admit that they're a bigot. And so what they want the luxury of doing is being a bigot without the stigma of bigotry or the accountability of bigotry. And by us having to even debate this, right? By us having to discuss this, it always increases. Like they move the ball a little bit further down the football field towards their goal. Like you said, his goal was Hitler should have finished the job. And so it becomes extremely dangerous. And then I have to look at the NCIS. Like my wife and my mother-in-law are probably watching NCIS right now. And in every single episode, they get the bad guy. What the heck happened here? Like this is like all the signals, all the signs are here, all the testimony is there, but it wasn't until he marched up the steps of the Capitol on January 6th that an investigation began at this scale. To now we understand the level of white supremacy that this man was drenched in as a contractor, an Army reservist and a Navy contractor. And so it is like we have been infiltrated at a level where now they have no regard for the threat. And I think some of the reason his commanding officer felt okay with it is because he, in some ways, probably found some of that funny, right? Just, he's just joking, or like he might be serious, but at the same time, he's a good guy. What does that say about the leadership across the ranks in the military? That says that the problem of white supremacy festering and growing in the military is not because these guys are going there and being quiet about it. It's because you're finding common cause with other people in the military. And that becomes extremely dangerous when we see how many people from law enforcement and the military were actually out there on January 6th. Because had they had their way, they would have had the support of people who actually wear uniforms.
Yeah, look, one more thing about this along similar lines. So some people will then take this up as a cause célèbre for cancel culture, because that's who the right wing is. And so, I don't know that they would go to bat for a guy who says Hitler should have finished the job, but I'm not sure. I'm really not sure, okay?
It's a possibility.
Now, but if Sergeant Getz were to be fired, I guarantee you people would flip out and say it's cancel culture. Right. Now, he's the Navy supervisor, like I told you. He told the judge, quote, he's proud to have someone like hale-cusanelli serve under me. And when asked later, hey, well, he seemed to have said terribly bigoted and racist things, Getz said, no, he would, quote, frequently buy breakfast for a black colleague. Oh, well, I guess that does it then. No one got lynched. Well, at that moment, he went on to invade the Capitol later in the midst of tremendous violence. And once a black person was bought breakfast. So I guess there's no racism to see here. Guys, 34 out of 44 colleagues said they heard him say repeatedly racist, anti-Semitic, sexist things. No one did anything.
Right.
And Getz thinks it's perfectly normal, and he was proud to have him serve under him. So it's not about Getz. But if you say to me, should this guy hale-cusanelli be not a Navy contractor anymore, even if he didn't do the Capitol riot, right? Of course not. Of course not. We're gonna have a contractor who says blacks and Jews and women are at the bottom of the totem pole. I don't know what that guy's gonna do with our money. That's our money that's going to a Navy contract. That's no way I'm gonna give a penny to an unbelievably hateful person like that. And then if you say to me, are you okay with Getz and just saying, oh yeah, proud to have this guy who thinks Hitler should have finished the job, serving there? No, look, man, how many black folks and Jewish folks and women serve there? And if it's perfectly normal that you have this monster walking around talking about Hitler and a Hitler mustache, you can't miss the guy, he's got a Hitler mustache on, right? If that's normal, don't we have a cancer in our society? You can't tell me it's a few bad apples when people like this have been rolling around with complete impunity. My God, I fear what anybody would like if someone at that building had taken a knee during the national anthem. I don't know how long they would have survived there. I don't know how quickly they would have been drummed out. But guys walk around with Hitler mustaches and nobody ever does anything about it. In fact, when he's arrested for being part of a white supremacy mob, they back him up and go proud to serve with him.
Right, right. And for them to say that he's not associated with any type of extremism. I mean, notwithstanding everything that he did before this, but to try to overthrow the United States government in the name of Donald Trump is the quintessential definition of extremism, right? And so, yes, he was an extremist and is an extremist and has always been an extremist from all the reports that came from his colleagues. But now to make that defense, and the problem that I have with it even much more so is that you have actual politicians who are trying to water down the significance of what happened on January 6th. And now their stories are aligning with his attorney stories saying that, oh, well, these are actually good people who wouldn't break the law and all these other things in order to kind of water down the impact of January 6th. And so it's like lockstep with white supremacy and Nazism, and we're seeing that coming from Republican leaders, and that's a significant problem.
And one last thing, for those of you out there who are stretching to find an excuse for Getz or anyone else who saw this guy walking around and never did anything about it. Look, it's not just one or two quotes about Jews. We read you some of those quotes. It's endless quotes. So he, of course, used the N-word, least surprising thing in the world. But to me, he attacked George Floyd, of course. But most importantly, he compared blacks to animals. How are there not blacks at a military base? Of course, there are black, troops at the base. But we let this guy, this monster, walk around. But that's because they don't think he's a monster.
Right.
That's the thing that's the most disturbing. It isn't about this one guy. It's about how normal this is. So it doesn't even stick out to anyone. They just go, okay, yeah, oh, hey, well, there's Timothy, being Timothy, hating black people and Jews. Oh, and then of course women. He can't stand women. Hey Tim, how you doing? Oh, we got breakfast for someone once. No, we got to figure out a way to protect all of us, not just some of us.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. We really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.